Me. The day they handed me the keys to the new system, my director shook my hand in front of the entire department and said, "Marcus, this company wouldn't be standing without you." That was a Thursday. By Monday, he couldn't remember my name on the severance paperwork. 22 years. I want you to sit with that number for a second. 22 years of quarterly closes, system migrations, audit cycles, and late nights when everyone else had gone home. I knew where every dollar in that company lived. I knew the routing numbers, the vendor codes, the shadow accounts that only 3 people in the building even knew existed. And when they decided to restructure, when they decided the new direction didn't include a 54-year-old controller who'd watched 3 CEOs come and go, they handed me a single sheet of paper and asked me to sign it before end of business. I nodded, said thank you, walked back to my desk. I did not sign it. My name is Marcus Webb. I spent 22 years as senior controller at a mid-sized logistics company headquartered outside of Columbus, Ohio. And what I'm about to tell you is the story of how one paragraph, buried in a contract addendum, a paragraph I had almost forgotten about, ended up costing that company $480,000, the termination of 2 senior vice presidents, and a federal compliance audit that took them 18 months to recover from. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I am not a vengeful person. I did not walk out of that building with a plan. I walked out with a banker's box, a ficus that had survived 3 office relocations, and a quiet kind of calm that surprised even me. My son Daniel was starting his junior year at Ohio State that fall. My wife Carol had gone back to school for her nursing degree 2 years earlier. We had built something careful and real, and I was not going to let one sheet of paper take it apart. But I also was not going to let them steal from me. Let me take you back to the beginning because the beginning matters. I joined the company in 2001. Small operation back then. 38 employees, 2 delivery routes, an accounting system that was essentially a very optimistic spreadsheet. The founder, a man named Gerald Holt, hired me away from a regional bank with a promise and a handshake. The promise was that if I helped him build the financial infrastructure from the ground up, I would be compensated accordingly when the company grew. We put that in writing. Gerald was old-fashioned that way. It was a standard employment contract with one addendum, Addendum B, that outlined a deferred compensation arrangement tied to company valuation milestones. Every time the company crossed a threshold, a percentage of that growth was to be credited to my deferred account, payable upon separation in good standing, retirement, or at Gerald's discretion. By 2015, Gerald had retired. His daughter, Renata, had taken over as CEO. She was sharp and aggressive and had very little patience for anything that predated her tenure. She brought in a new CFO, a man I will call my new CFO, because in this story, he does not deserve a real name. He was 41, wore slim-fit suits, and had opinions about everything except the things he actually needed to understand. The deferred compensation account, by my calculation, had grown to somewhere between $400,000 and $450,000 over 22 years. I had never pushed for it. Gerald had always said it would be there when I needed it, and I had trusted that. That was my mistake. Not the only one, but the first one. The restructuring announcement came on a Tuesday in September. The CEO called it a strategic realignment. My new CFO used the phrase right-sizing the leadership layer. I sat in the conference room and watched a slide deck tell me that my position was being eliminated in a cost-efficiency initiative. After the meeting, my new CFO pulled me into his office and told me the company was offering a standard severance, 12 weeks of base pay and continuation of benefits through the end of the year. He slid the separation agreement across the desk, with the practiced ease of someone who had done this before. I looked at it. I saw the section waiving my right to claims against the company. I saw the non-disparagement clause. I saw the section marked full and final settlement. I did not see any mention of addendum B. I said, "What about the deferred compensation?" My new CFO looked at me the way people look at you when they are deciding whether to lie or just to misdirect. He said, "Marcus, that arrangement was informal. Gerald's been gone for almost a decade. There's nothing on the books." I said, "It was in my employment contract." He said, "We've had a lot of contracts over the years." I nodded. I picked up the separation agreement. I folded it once, very neatly, and I put it in my jacket pocket. I told him I need a few days to review it with my family. He said the offer expired Friday. I went home. I did not tell Carol about the deferred compensation conversation. Not yet. I went to the filing cabinet in our home office, the one Carol has been asking me to replace since 2017, and I found my original employment contract from 2001. It was in a manila folder behind the folder for Daniel's birth certificate and ahead of the folder for our homeowner's insurance. I sat at the kitchen table, and I read Addendum B for the first time in probably 15 years. It was still there, every word of it. And then I read something I had completely forgotten about. A subclause in Section 4 of the addendum. It was titled System Access and Data Stewardship. Gerald had insisted on it back in 2001 because he was terrified of losing institutional knowledge when key employees left. The clause stated that in the event of separation, without proper deferred compensation settlement, the departing employee retained custodial rights over any proprietary financial systems, data architecture, or reporting infrastructure they had personally designed or implemented during their tenure, until such time as the compensation obligation was satisfied in full. I had built the company's entire accounting system. Every module, every integration, every custom report. I had migrated us through 3 different platforms. I had designed the current ERP configuration from scratch when we switched providers in 2018. My credentials, technically, under that clause, were not the company's property to revoke without settlement. I closed the folder. I made myself a cup of coffee. I sat there in the quiet of the kitchen and thought about Daniel and his tuition, and Carol and her nursing program and the 22 years I had given to that building. Then I called my brother-in-law, who is a contract attorney in Cincinnati. He came down that weekend. We sat at the same kitchen table and he read the addendum 3 times. He looked up at me on the 3rd read and said, "Marcus, do you understand what this says?" I said I thought I did. He said, "This is not informal, this is enforceable. And this subclause, they almost certainly don't know it's there." I asked him what my options were. He said I had 2. I could litigate, file a claim for breach of contract, and pursue the deferred compensation through the courts, which would take time, cost money, and go public. Or I could send a formal notice of the clause, assert my custodial rights, and wait to see what they did. I chose the second option. On Monday morning, 1 hour before my new CFO's Friday deadline technically expired, I had kept very careful track of the business days. My brother-in-law sent a certified letter to the company's general counsel. It was 3 pages. It referenced Addendum B in full. It outlined my deferred compensation balance with supporting calculations going back to 2001, and it formally asserted my custodial rights under Section 4 of the addendum over all financial systems and data architecture I had personally designed during my tenure, noting that revocation of my system access without prior settlement of the compensation obligation would constitute a material breach. That afternoon, my new CFO called my cell phone. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was very carefully worded but contained the word misunderstanding 4 times in 90 seconds. I sent his voicemail to my brother-in-law without listening to the rest. The next call came from the company's general counsel. That one I answered. She was professional, careful. She asked if we could schedule a meeting to discuss the addendum in more detail. I said of course. We scheduled it for Thursday. I want to tell you what happened between Monday and Thursday, because I only learned the details later through my brother-in-law's discovery process. Apparently, when the general counsel received that letter, her first call was to my new CFO. She asked him whether he had reviewed my employment contract before initiating the separation. He told her the HR team had handled it. She asked HR whether they had reviewed my original 2001 contract. HR said they had used a standard template from their record system, which only went back to 2010. The general counsel asked whether anyone had checked for addenda or amendments prior to 2010. There was a long silence. She then apparently walked down to the server room with the IT director to check the company's access logs. My credentials had been deactivated 2 days after my last day in the office, standard offboarding procedure, but my name was still listed as the primary architect on 17 system modules in the ERP documentation, including the payroll integration, the accounts payable workflow, and the quarterly tax reporting engine. The IT director, to his credit, understood immediately what this meant. He reportedly told the general counsel, verbatim, if his claim holds, we potentially just locked him out of systems he legally still has custodial authority over. She asked what the practical implications were. He said it was complicated. Thursday came. I sat across from the general counsel in a conference room I had attended probably 300 meetings in. My brother-in-law sat to my left. My new CFO sat to the general counsel's right, looking at the table. The CEO, Renata, was not there. I found out later she had been in the building but had chosen not to attend, which told me everything I needed to know about where this was going. The general counsel opened by acknowledging that the addendum was valid and enforceable. She said the company took its contractual obligations seriously. She said there had been an oversight in the offboarding process. I waited. She slid a document across the table. It was a settlement offer. It was not for $480,000. It was for $200,000, with a full waiver of all claims and a non-disclosure agreement. I looked at the number. I looked at my brother-in-law. He gave me the smallest nod. I said, "Thank you for this. I'll need to review it." She said, "We'd like to move quickly on a resolution." I said, "I understand." So would I. We left. Outside in the parking lot, my brother-in-law said, "They're scared of the custodial rights claim." I said I could tell. He said the question was whether we pressed it or took the settlement. He said the custodial rights claim, if we escalated, could trigger a notification obligation to their external auditor. The company had a pending contract renewal with a federal logistics partner. He had looked this up. Any unresolved contractual dispute involving core financial system access could complicate that renewal. I drove home and thought about it for 2 days. I thought about the way my new CFO had said informal with such absolute confidence. I thought about 22 years of quarterly closes. I thought about Daniel calling me from his dorm 3 weeks earlier to say he'd made the dean's list, and how he tried to make his voice sound casual, like it wasn't a big deal because he knew I was worried about money. I called my brother-in-law and told him to escalate. He filed a formal assertion of custodial rights with the company's external auditor, CC's the company's general counsel. The letter noted that the company had revoked system access without settling a contractual compensation obligation, and that under the terms of the addendum, this revocation was in breach. It requested that the auditor note the dispute in their records pending resolution. The external auditor was required to disclose the dispute in a footnote on the company's next financial review. The federal logistics partner had a standard compliance clause in their contract. Any company with open legal or contractual disputes involving core financial systems had to report it before renewal. The renewal was in 6 weeks. My new CFO called me again on a Wednesday evening. This time I answered. He said, "Marcus, I think we can do better than the previous offer." I said, "I think you probably can." He asked what number I had in mind. I said I didn't have a number in mind. I said my contract had a number in it, and I was happy to calculate accrued interest if that would help. There was a pause. He said he would get back to me. The next call came from Renata herself. I had spoken to her exactly twice in the past 4 years. She was direct. She said the company wanted to resolve this before the quarter-end review. She said they were prepared to honor the full deferred compensation balance plus reasonable accrued interest. I said that sounded correct. She asked if we could finalize a number by end of week. My brother-in-law and I submitted our calculation the next morning. The deferred compensation principal, accrued at the contractual rate from each milestone date through my separation date, came to $462,000, with interest $481,000. They came back at $475,000. My brother-in-law said we could push. I said $475 was fine. The wire hit our account on a Friday afternoon, 11 weeks after I had folded that separation agreement and put it in my jacket pocket. Carol was at her clinical rotation. I texted her, "Check our account." She called me back in 4 minutes. I could hear her walking, the sound of a hospital hallway behind her, and she said, Marcus, is that real?" I said it was real. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "That's Daniel's whole college. That's Daniel's whole college. That's Enroll. Marcus, that's everything." I told her I'd make dinner. I made her pasta carbonara, which I'm mediocre at, but it was her favorite from when we first started dating, and it felt like the right night for it. The postscript, which came out later through people still inside the company, my new CFO resigned 3 months after the settlement, officially for personal reasons, though the timing coincided with the federal logistics partner requiring a full contractual review of their relationship with the company. The IT director, who had actually flagged the issue early and behaved professionally throughout, was promoted. The general counsel sent my brother-in-law a note. professionally worded, acknowledging that the resolution had been handled appropriately by all parties. He thought that was funny. I thought it was honest. I had been retired for 8 months now. Daniel made the dean's list again this past semester. Carol finishes her nursing degree in the spring. I have been fishing more than I probably should, and reading books I kept meaning to get to for 20 years, and drinking coffee on the back porch in the mornings without looking at a single spreadsheet. I want to leave you with the thing I kept thinking about through all of this. Not the money, though the money mattered. Not the principle, though the principle mattered too. It was a conversation I had with Gerald Holt, maybe 6 months after I joined the company, back when we were still small enough that he and I shared a coffee pot and a break room that was also the supply closet. He said to me, "Marcus, nobody's going to look out for your interests in a contract unless you do. Read everything. Keep everything. The day you need it, you'll be glad you did." I almost didn't. I almost signed that separation agreement on a Friday because my new CFO said the offer expired and I was tired and a little ashamed, the way you get ashamed when something you built rejects you. But I kept the contract in a manila folder in a filing cabinet that Carol has been asking me to replace since 2017. Read your contracts, keep your contracts. And if someone tells you a written agreement is informal, call your brother-in-law. If this story hit close to home, drop a comment below and tell me, would you have fought back or would you have walked away? I read every single one. And if you know someone who's been through something like this, share this with them. Sometimes the best thing you can hear is that somebody else made it through.